Hello and welcome to episode 161 of the Clean Energy Show. I'm Brian Stockton.
I'm James Whittingham. This week, big developments in battery technology. One light enough for airplanes and one coming this year that uses sodium. No word if my arteries can be turned into batteries yet.
In order to keep pace with the USA's Inflation Reduction Act, Canada has offered a massive subsidy to Volkswagen for them to set up a battery factory in Canada. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau presided over the announcement. Then Joe Biden showed up before donning his sunglasses and peeling away in his 67 Corvette.
Journalists at the Shanghai Motor Show say EVs are on their way to dominate the world. Is there such a thing as too much of a good thing? Ask my arteries how they feel about my salt intake.
Crop dusting is going electric. Small autonomous drones are taking over from noisy, polluting small aircraft. This could greatly simplify the tending of the grow-op James has in his backyard.
That's medicinal! Also this week, GM discontinues the EV I just bought. Tesla's battery degradation is so small, you should stop worrying right now. All that and more on this week's edition of The Clean Energy Show.
And as I often do, I like to start with a radon update.
Radon update. The deadly gas in your home, Brian Stockton.
The deadly gas that's in my home. We put in a radon pipe. I reported on that last week. So the radon meter, I left it here in the bomb shelter over the last week because this was the room I was kind of most worried about. So there's a drain in the floor and they kind of sealed that up.
You spoiled it. I see an 18 on that meter, Brian. That's really good.
The radon pipe is way on the other side of the house. You know, the idea is the pipe is supposed to relieve the air pressure from underneath the entire house. But this kind of being the furthest part away, there's no proper kind of ventilation here in my bomb shelter. But anyway, yeah, I left it for the last week and the number is only 18. It's still under 20. So that's really good. I'm probably not going to die from radiation poisoning from doing this podcast.
Yes, big win for you, Brian. Big win. You know, we're recording this one in the morning for once. It's been a couple of years since we recorded in the morning. I think I'm more perky in the morning.
I know I am.
I'm too old to make it into the afternoon with any sort of energy.
Yeah. It's like that Seinfeld episode where they're trying to get that old guy fired so they would, book a meeting for late in the day and watch him fall asleep.
Well, I just wanted to mention that, on Saturday, I was supposed to go to a 2.5-hour trip to Saskatoon for my daughter who advanced in a French-speaking, speech competition called Concours, but they canceled it. They canceled the in-person event, not because of some sort of pandemic, but because they couldn't get enough people to adjudicate, which seemed like a lame thing because this is a really well-organized event that takes place every year. Anyway, for 6 weeks, I've been hemming and hawing over this thing. Am I going to make it? What's the weather going to be like? What's the average temperature on that day? Will that charging station at the halfway point open or not in a town called Davidson? It did not. So on Saturday, I went out into the highway just to test out what it would be like. It wasn't very warm. I was like just above freezing, really, but it was sunny. And we're here in Canada, so we're having a terrible, terrible spring, so it's way, way colder than it's supposed to be. Anyway, I didn't need any heat in the car or air conditioning, so that reduced my energy consumption. I had a bit of a wind going one direction, but I found out that I could have made it easily. This is just with me in the car. I needed to add 2 more people. That sort of changes the dynamics, but I'm the bigger of all, obviously, so that's taken care of. And I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed driving on the highway with an EV. And I figured out a lot about my energy consumption and, what to look for. Like, it's kind of cool that the Chevrolet Bolt has the actual kilowatts that you're using at any given moment, which is kind of fascinating because if you get behind a vehicle, not a semi, but just a vehicle, you can see that really go down from the wind. What is it called? The drafting. Even though I'm not drafting, I'm still quite a ways away. You can really see the minutia of the energy consumption when you have the cruise control on. Yeah. And it's quite fascinating. So I just realized that I have, 65 kilowatts hours in the battery. So if I keep it around 23, 22 kilowatts, I know that I can make a 3-hour trip, for instance. Yeah. Something like that. So,
and if you're getting in trouble, you can find a semi to draft behind. And I have done that before.
Really?
Partly just out of, curiosity.
With the Tesla?
With the Tesla, and I remember doing it in a gas car. We were driving several years ago on the highway, and it was just a particularly windy, nasty day. And that car had a sort of a real-time gauge of fuel consumption. And you could see it go down as soon as we were drafting behind that semi.
Yeah, I did that with my kid when we had one of our Priuses, because it'll do it instantly. It'll show you the fuel consumption instantly when you reset it.
Yeah.
And I think it was a windy day, and we drafted behind a semi, and it was a fraction compared to not being behind the semi.
Yeah.
And we had radar cruise control, so you can sort of, punch it in and just sort of lock into that semi. But I find it, as a Canadian, kind of rude.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, I remember going on a trip with my friend Kevin to Edmonton when we were young adults, and he got road rage because somebody was drafting him. So he started going slow. He's basically like a character from Seinfeld. He holds a grudge very quickly, and he's very determined to do anything possible, even if it's socially unacceptable. But anyway, that was the case then. And also, Brian, I got my charger installed. GM installed my charger. We bought a Chevrolet Bolt EV, I want to say 5 or 6 weeks ago now, I guess. And with that comes the free installation of a level 2 240-volt charger. Now, we had a charger that came with the car because someone ordered it. The EUV version comes with it automatically. So it's a dual voltage charger. It does 7.5 kilowatts, which is more than twice as fast as what I had with the Leaf on level 2. My house couldn't handle any more electricity, so they just upgraded the current charger. So the charger was future-proof, because when I had it put in, I said, put in a thick wire so that I can upgrade it in the future when we have, modern EVs. And that was 5 years ago. And sure enough, I have a modern EV that can charge a lot faster. So yeah, we're finding that very cool. Like it's kind of useful that it charges twice as fast now, the Bolt. And if we need to go somewhere, and it's kind of just comforting to see that range go up quicker than it used to. And it was flawless. Like all they had to do is change the breaker, inspect the wires, make sure it was kosher, and it was, and put in a new sort of an RV box, outdoor box. They said this is the first one they've actually installed for GM in our location that was outside. Most people have garages. I do not, which is fine. You do not. You've got a carport, which is halfway there, I guess. Mm-hmm. And I'm happy. It's just, it was I've read so many horror stories in the United States about Q-Merit and this system that they have, but I really like the electrician. I like the electrician company. I would go back to them again. And they said that there was sort of an exposed wire on my EV charger, and asked if it didn't work before on my breaker panel. So one day it didn't. That was about, I don't know, a couple months ago, which is weird. I thought maybe something was wrong.
Your old charger.
And we got a couple of error messages on the Bolt as well, but I didn't know what that was about, but they did go away, and apparently that's something that happens. They didn't say it was dangerous or anything. They just said, we thought, it would result in your thing not working. So, and they were surprised that it only didn't work once, and I just reset the breaker and it worked. Yeah.
Now, I may have asked you this before, but do you charge it to 100%? Like, no. The default in a Tesla is it charges to 90 for most of them.
There's no real default in a Bolt. I think it came preset. It might have been preset to 100%. I think the manual recommends 80%. And that's fine. I mean, it's pretty easy to go to 100% if you're using the car on a regular basis, because you can just tell it to charge it to 100% before you leave for work in the morning, and it will not sit at 100% for any length of time if you should. But Brian, we'll never need to do that unless we're going on a trip. So yeah, I've actually lowered it to 80%, but then that gets into, because it's cold out, about 285 kilometers of range, it'll tell you. And that's kind of depressing when I like to see 300 plus, But in the summer, and hopefully if spring ever comes, and whatever groundhog said that, winter is going to last a long time, go with that groundhog. That groundhog knows what they're talking about, because holy cow, what a horrible spring we're having. Horrible.
It's the worst. But yeah, if you're new to EVs, it is better to keep the battery kind of in that 20% to 80% range. You get the most degradation of the battery if you go to 100% and then down to zero frequently. And we're going to talk a bit about battery degradation later in the show.
All EVs, though, do have a buffer, but the Chevy Bolt is said to have a larger buffer at the top end. So when you're charging to 100%, you're not actually at 100%. But
Yeah.
still, it's probably 95% or something of the actual battery capacity.
Now they've added a new feature. This is I've got an Apple MacBook Pro that I'm working on here, and they did start adding a feature recently where it won't always charge your MacBook Pro to 100% if it knows that you use it on power most of the time. But I just find it irritating because there's no, like, I would just set it to 80 or 90% permanently. But Apple doesn't let you do that. Apple loves to do things automatically. Tim Cook likes to control your computer as much as possible. So mine usually charges to 100% because, every once in a while, like once a week, twice a week, I use it on battery. The battery life in this laptop is so amazing that I could easily just set it to 80%, and that would do me for all the time. I've never gone close to running out the battery on this.
That is a good analogy for electric cars, because if you have a larger battery, it's going to last you. You're not going to have to worry about it because you're going to charge 80%. On the highway, when you're DC fast charging, that's all you can do is charge really to 80% without taking a tremendous amount of time in most cases, because it really slows down after 80%.
Yeah.
So you probably only plan on charging 80%. So if that 80% is bigger than other batteries and other cars, then that's a good thing for you. So something to consider is how much range do you have at 80% and how much, because that's often what you're dealing with.
And that's why, laptop batteries often only last, 3 or 4 years, because you usually charge them to 100. It sits at 100 for a long time. They're just not cared for properly. So I would love it if there was just a setting to just keep the battery between 20 to 80% on your laptop, and then it would just probably last forever. So I ran into our friend Stephen Hall, and I wanted to mention it because Stephen was the first of our friends to get solar power on his house around here. So I've had mine for 5 or 6 years. He put in his like 7 or 8 years ago. But he moved to a different house recently. He was probably sad to see his solar system go, but he did the same thing at his new house that he did at the old house, which is build a new garage in the back. It's a back lane kind of house, so you can put a garage back there. So he did the exact same thing, built a garage, sort of a studio garage, and then put solar on it on his new house. But I wanted to mention it because the technology just in 7 or 8 years has improved a lot. So on the new installation, he's got bifacial solar.
Really? At his house?
Yeah, at his house. So collectors on both sides. So, the output is just a lot more than his old system or mine or your system, which are old fashioned, one face solar. I think my panels are 280 watts each, but now it's common to get them up to like 450 watts each.
Wow. Holy crap.
Bifacial. So we were comparing, he brought out his app and we had a really sunny day about a week ago. And he made 80 kilowatt hours on that day. And I only made 40 kilowatt hours on that day.
Okay, how big's his system? How big's your system?
I didn't ask, but they would definitely be similar number of panels. But his is obviously a larger system because each, it's a similar number. I've got 31 panels. I suspect he has around the same number. But this new system, bifacial, made twice as much as I did on that day.
That's stupid. Just stupid. That's very interesting. We need to know, Stephen, if you're listening, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com, what your system size is, your peak output of your system.
Total size, number of panels.
Because just because it's bifacial doesn't mean you get twice as much power.
No, but, and maybe his orientation is better than mine too. I'm not sure. But
that's quite possible. Like because as he built the garage, he would have built it for that reason, for putting the solar panels on it the best possible.
Yeah. I'll start making more power later in the summer just because mine are at a lower angle.
Let's go drive by his house. It's just he just bought a house 2 doors over or something, didn't he?
I think so. It's near the old one, yeah.
That's a lot of work, just to change houses. But I don't know how bifacial solar panels work on a roof because, if you're in a farm field, you're picking up reflection off the ground, which is, we learned, more significant actually in the summertime than in the winter, even with snow reflecting. But how do you even pick up anything off the roof? I don't get that. It doesn't make sense. They're all close together, Brian.
Still light gets through the panels. The panels aren't opaque. So light can still, get through the cracks.
It's like a second chance. It's like two filters for a water system. It's like the first one collects and then the second one collects too. Okay, I see.
Yeah. And this data suggests that obviously it works well.
Obviously, his data suggests that. If he's not faking it. Well, that's very interesting. Holy cow.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, he mentioned to me that my inverter, he was envying my inverter because it was several percent more efficient than his, because I
Right.
had a newer inverter from the same company.
Yeah.
And over the course of the 25, 30-year lifespan of the panels, that's a lot of electricity just from that,
Yeah, a few
5% or 3% or 5% improvement or whatever it was.
Yeah. So, this is the downside to being an early adopter. So, our systems are maybe not the top spec right now, but we've had 5 or 6 years of energy generation. So that's the trade-off, is that you can't wait forever to do this kind of thing.
I also want
Getting
to
in
know,
early is good too.
at what point, this is something I brought up with the solar installers, at some point, my panels are going to last 25 years and be, 80% efficient by then? They'll lose efficiency gradually, and they'll still be fairly useful at 25 years, and they're guaranteed for 25 years by the manufacturer. But at what point is it make more sense to upgrade because future panels would be more productive on the same area? It may be that way at some, before 25 years are up, to upgrade the panels, keep the rack, hopefully the rack is the same standard, the size of them, or maybe it'll be possible to get that size because it'll be a market to retrofit older houses. But at some point, it might be worth it to upgrade before waiting for those panels to go down, because say they're 85% efficient at some point, you've lost 50% there, but then you've gained apparently gobs and gobs of percentiles of efficiency in the newer panels. Maybe it's worth it. And of course, it depends on what government program is in place to allow you to feed back into the grid. Or if batteries are really cheap in the future, that's possible too. I mean, 10 years from now.
I think I would need a new inverter, because I think mine is sort of maxed out to the same size as my panels. Like, it's an 8.7 kilowatt system, and I think it's about an 8.7 kilowatt inverter.
So Brian, GM has discontinued my beloved Chevrolet Bolt EV. Now, I suspected this. I smelled this. I sniffed this out, because they said the model year is not going to change in July as it usually does to 24. Okay. They said it was going to wait till November. Now, I said, okay, that means they're not going to produce any more cars, because that's a long time to wait. That's 6 months pretty much. Yeah. So I kind of knew that it was coming. There was rumors that it was coming. Our listener Dawn on Twitter says it's because the Bolt is losing money. Now, it used to lose money, but they also said that in 2019 that it was going to stop losing money around 2022, 2023. Plus, they knocked like 6,000 Canadian off the American price or something like that. Just God, I don't know, it might have been 6,000 American, but it was thousands of dollars they knocked off the price.
Yeah.
When was that? I can't remember. A few months ago. I think it was maybe the end of last year. They didn't do it here, unfortunately, where we live, so I had to pay more. But why would you knock money off a car that is selling very well, that there's a long lineup, a long waiting list for it? They can't make enough of them. If you're losing money on it, you want to lose more money. Like, I don't understand, because I know you need to meet net zero targets, but here, I'll tell you one of the reasons they might have done it. It's because Chevy says the Bolt has the largest conquest ratio of all non-GM drivers. That is to say, guys like me who came from Toyota, really happy with the quality and service of Toyota, didn't want to go to Chevy. Chevy's the last place I wanted to go, pretty much. I mean, Lada or Skoda might have been one of them last places I wanted to go. But Chevy was, I did not have positive views of the Chevy brand. And I went there. So now I'm a Chevy person. Well, for now. I actually there's some problems with the carpet on the floor coming off already.
Oh, yeah.
So we're buying some expensive laser fit mats for it.
Oh, yeah.
But generally speaking, the car is rock solid. And we like the styling of it. We like the interior styling of it. And the layout is really smart, like I've said before, of how they do all the controls. The infotainment system is well done. I have no complaints. The seats are completely comfortable, even for me. And I'm a delicate person. I'm a very large person with a bad back. And it's just working out perfectly for me. So I have no complaints about the Chevy. I think they had different Chevy people working on it. The younger people came in and made the EV because it does not like a lot of reviews say this doesn't seem like a normal Chevy. So yeah, I'm happy with that, and I might put a deposit down on an Equinox, which should be much larger. It'll charge 3 times as fast peak charging on the highway, which will almost resolve my major highway concern. So
yeah, well, presumably with the Equinox, their next generation, They probably figured out how to build them cheaper. So maybe they were still losing money on the Bolt. And now if they move people to the Equinox, they're going to be making money or, losing less.
Yeah, it's the Ultium platform, this platform that they're using on all their vehicles. It's a singular platform. So it's like a skateboard platform and a sort of way that they do the batteries, using, VW does that too. Like they're going to have one platform for all vehicles. And the Bolt platform was made in the mid teens. It was a long time ago now. It was
ancient history now.
Very old, but yeah. My wife says it is a bit constraining with her work, that it's a bit small sometimes. But generally speaking, she says she can adapt, and she's adapting. And it's not a major problem at all. So we're quite happy with it, even though it's small. But the Equinox is a lot bigger, and it's supposed to start around $37,000 in our country and $30,000 in the United States. Yeah, it even has a towing capacity, 1,500 pounds. That's I can tow something. So I don't know. We'll see. I might put a deposit down. We'll see. So 80% of owners came from a non-GM vehicle. They have the highest satisfaction rate for the Bolt than any other vehicle at GM. So yeah, not only are they coming from other brands, but people really like the car. So That's a good thing. I don't know if I have anything to worry about. I mean, the parts are going to be around. I wasn't planning on hanging on to the car forever, because I know that cars are going to come down and we could get something that charges faster on the highway and is a bit bigger. I would put charging faster on the highway as my number one concern. And because, it's as small as a car as it is, it's pretty big on the inside because it's an EV. There's no, they've made the most out of the space.
Yeah. And given the price, I was considering too. And I would never normally consider a GM vehicle.
Yeah.
So I want to move on to Volkswagen here. So this is a major announcement here in Canada that Volkswagen is going to build a battery factory here in Canada. And as we've talked before on the show, the Inflation Reduction Act in the U.S. from Joe Biden is a massive, massive spending bill. And Canada, being very closely tied to the U.S., was in danger of kind of losing all of these kinds of factories to the U.S. because the subsidies are so attractive. So what did they do? Canada had to match the subsidies, basically. So this is a battery plant that may have gone into the U.S., but Canada stepped up and offered them some massive, massive subsidies. So this story here is from Electrek. As a free trade partner with the U.S. looking to stay relevant in a booming EV production landscape, Canada said, sorry, not so fast to the U.S. And Canada's industry minister was able to negotiate a deal with Volkswagen that matches those U.S. subsidies in exchange for building the battery factory a bit further north in Canada. So the subsidy is around 13 billion Canadian dollars, which is a lot, about 9.7 in U.S. dollars. Over the next decade, as it's in operation, they're going to put about 500 million into building the factory, the Canadian government, and then the rest of the subsidies will sort of occur over time, approximately over 10 years. So the other thing about this, it's about 2 hours northeast of Detroit. So this is just across the border in Canada. So that helps being close to Detroit, which a lot of the Canadian auto industry already is. There's lots of auto manufacturing kind of near Detroit, just over the border. It's expected to have a footprint equivalent to 350 football fields.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a massive, massive factory, and expecting it to create thousands of jobs in
Won't
Ontario.
this be the biggest factory in Canada by far?
Yeah, I would say that that's certainly possible. I don't have that confirmed.
Yeah, and another thing is that the stipulation on this is that if for some reason the Inflation Reduction Act in the States is repealed or damaged or changed, we don't have to keep up with that anymore as the
Right.
Canadian, the incentives go down after that. So that's an interesting aspect of the deal. But this is big news for Canada. There was rumors that Tesla was shopping for a battery factory here, and apparently 13 million wasn't enough for you, Elon.
Billion, yeah.
$1 billion. That's, I don't know how this is playing out politically, because that's a lot of money for something that most people don't understand. Why would you build a battery factory for these EVs, which are stupid and no one wants? In the petro state of Canada. So I don't know how it's playing out.
Well, and as we've often discussed, and there's often stories in the media, it's often the red states in the U.S. that are benefiting the most from these clean energy things. And you could say the same thing about, Ontario and Canada, more of a conservative area. But it's often these conservative areas that are benefiting from these things that they maybe don't
Well,
know
tell
that they
that
want.
to
Yeah.
Alberta, who thinks that it's a big liberal elitist state, the province of Ontario.
Yeah, that's right.
That's what they think about everywhere, but they're not just thinking about outside of Toronto, the suburbs and the other cities, like the blue collar cities. It's a big deal for Canada, and it's good to see, but I'm a little nervous because there's a lot of money, and I don't want people to be upset.
Yeah.
Because then they take to the streets with their guns. And by the way, the guy down the street from me has an F. Trudeau sticker on his car.
Yeah.
Those
are very common.
I really pissed off about that because he parks in front of my house sometimes. So people think it's my sticker. Like he doesn't have enough parking spaces and he's like 2 or 3 doors down and he's like decides to just park his shitty van in front of my house with a stupid sticker on it for my kids and everyone other kid to see.
I saw a nice tweet the other day. Why can't people hate Trudeau in a normal way? It's sure he's a politician. He's not going to do things that you like, but people really, really hate him in an awful
I'll tell you what it is, Brian. This is getting deep on our show and outside our purview, but it has a lot to do with normalizing women as being equals. Defense minister's a woman. Half of his cabinet was women. He's known as a feminist, at least to non-feminists.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a lot of non-feminists around Western Canada who think that the society is changing and they don't like it.
Yeah.
Immigration and everything else, of course. So people think that the white male has it hard, and that's why. And the world's changing. They don't understand EVs. They don't understand climate change. They don't understand policies to help each other with pandemics and things like that. And it's unsettled a lot of people. Of course, our listeners have their own opinions, I'm sure. You could write us, but it's really not what our show's about. We just like to talk about life sometimes. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with talking about life. We, as we say all the time on the show, we don't talk about battery advancements because they're all hogwash. There are things that we actually at least once a day get an email from somebody who wants to be on the show, even though we don't have guests. Their PR company is emailing us trying to get so-and-so president of whatnot on the show, and because he's got this great battery development. Well, it doesn't really work out. I mean, some of them might work out, but they could be 20 years away before they figure out how to make them safe, how to make them charge fast, how to make them economical. There's all these things have to be checked off before they will work.
Most of the battery technology available now is essentially good enough for what we need to do. But continue.
It is. And CATL is now the world's largest battery manufacturer. So this is not somebody in a lab. This is the people who are actually making batteries and having billion-dollar battery factories started around the world. Huge. Chinese company, of course. But this is, without them, I mean, there'd be no EVs. This is one of the biggest players in the world for stored energy in EVs and otherwise. So CATL recently, I think it was a couple of years ago, came up with a sodium-ion battery. And that is now being put into cars. So it wasn't an announcement that basically would fizzle into the ether. It was real. And now they have an announcement that says that they have a high energy density battery. They made this announcement last week. And I think it's significant. A lot of people are significant, even though we lack some details. So normally we don't like to talk about this, but they don't fool around, Brian. The energy dense battery has an energy density of 500 watt hours, which is twice of what is out there now. Now, energy density, I don't expect everyone to know what this is. So let me explain it. It is the amount of energy in a certain volume and weight. So if I have, I don't know, a milk jug and it holds twice as much battery power as another milk jug and weighs the same, that is twice as energy dense than the other battery. That's a good thing because batteries are heavy. They weigh down EVs. The more batteries you use, the more you need to move that battery around, right? So there's kind of a point of where the car is getting too heavy and there's not enough room for them. But a big thing with battery density is airplanes, because you got to get them off the ground. Well, battery density of 500 watts is thought to be a very good place. This is 500 watts per kilogram, by the way, for electrified flight. And they know that. So they are working with airplane manufacturers to develop and sort of certify these batteries for safe flight. And that's going to be a huge deal. Hell, I might want to invest in them. Yes, because it's twice of what their next battery can do. And that's next battery can power an EV for 1,000 kilometers. Like you say, the batteries that are capable out there now are pretty damn good. Well, doubling your energy density is a big deal. And they're safe. They're supposed to be safer too. They're a semi-solid state. They're calling it a condensed state battery, which is semi-solid state. CATL claims, we've been talking a lot about solid state batteries, that those are still quite a ways away. It could be 2035. There's still a lot to work out, they're saying. Toyota promised them by now. They're not here. A lot of people have promised them by now. So yeah, those are one of those things. But this is a semi-solid state battery, and they call it a condensed state battery. I won't get into the nitty-gritty of it because I don't fully understand it, and you won't want to hear it. So for now, it'll be in some EVs by the end of this year. The end of this year, they're going to throw them in some EVs. They've already got a deal with an automaker to try them out and put them in an EV. But it's going to be a lower energy density than the potential for the product. So they're not going to see the full energy potential for this type of technology by the end of the year. The maturity of the battery in full production is still likely years away, according to analysts. So yeah, but it will see the light of day by the end of this year and get better. And, a lot of batteries, LFP batteries are getting better. They were kind of really low energy density. Now they've really improved those. And those are the cheaper batteries, right?
Yeah. And it's okay if these ones cost a little bit more, especially to start with, or cost more just for airplanes. So an airplane can afford a more expensive battery. And then eventually this technology presumably will trickle down. Yeah. And then everybody will get it at that, lower cost.
But if you need less batteries and they're more expensive because you don't have to have as many to push the car around.
That's right.
It sort of comes around in that way, doesn't it? Yeah. So it's a semi-solid state battery. It says there are still things to be worked out with solid state batteries and that are currently not viable, which is interesting to hear from them. Currently, mainstream lithium ion battery cells have energy densities of between 200 and 300 watts hours per kilogram. NIO says it has a new 150 kilowatt hour semi-solid state battery that will be available in a few months that has an energy density of 360. So yeah, other people are making progress too beyond 200 to 300 watt hours per kilogram, and that's very important. And they make so many of these things that the technology and the price trickles down, the learning of the manufacturing and all that. Last week, the company CATL announced its first production sodium-ion battery to power EVs from Chinese brand Chery. CATL revealed its sodium-ion batteries just a couple of years ago, claiming the ability for 80% charge in 15 minutes, which is 3 minutes faster than what Hyundai and Kia are doing with their 800-volt architecture and Porsche. They're producing them. And we'll talk about them a bit later in the show because I want to touch base with that a little bit more. So that's why I'm highlighting this new battery. It's lots happening with batteries, and this is the people.
Yeah,
this is the player that you want to hear good news from because they're not fooling around. They're real. It's real. So that's very cool. If
it's coming from CATL, that's good news.
Now, what doesn't matter with energy density, Brian, is grid storage, because you can use a cheaper battery and a larger footprint because it doesn't matter. It can be as heavy as you want it to be because the earth will hold it.
Yeah.
And if it's a bigger volume, that's fine too.
Okay, so moving on to crop dusting. This is something I don't think we've ever talked about before on the show, but I think it's a great example of how electrification and autonomy is really changing things, really changing industry. So this was something I'd never heard about, but there's a couple of different stories here. One from Electrek here and one from Bloomberg. So there's a company called Guardian Agriculture that has been approved now from the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration in the US, to be the first ones to commercially authorize eVTOL spraying for crops in the US. So these are drones that look a lot like any sort of like a camera drone that you might see, but it is for spraying crops.
So instead of spraying the whole land, these little suckers pinpoint through AI what a weed looks like.
Well, that's the next story. This there's sort of two different ones. The one I'm talking about now seems more like a general sprayer. So the drone still has a pipe coming out of it that stretches like, a yard or two on either side. Oh,
I saw a video on those. Yeah, they're very interesting. The guy goes out with like a van and a whole bunch of jugs of stuff, and the drone comes back when it's empty, and you just refill it, and it goes back out there, and it's just a lot easier.
Yeah, you just refill it and maybe pop in a new battery. So It seems to spray more like a traditional crop sprayer. So it's got a 9.1 kilowatt hour battery. So that's maybe like the fifth of a size of a car.
That is huge. That's very big. Wow. And this is another thing that high energy density batteries will do is stuff like this. This is going to be crazy.
Obviously, you need your batteries to be light if you're doing a drone because you want to be able to fly the thing. So it's got 4 6-foot propellers. So this is a fairly large in terms of drones.
6-foot propellers?
Yeah.
This is like human size. eVTOLs.
It says it's about 40 horsepowers and it can cover 40 acres per hour of full field crop protection. So yeah, flies around, does 40 acres in an hour, and then presumably it lands, you fill it up with new stuff, put a new battery in it, something like that. The other thing I didn't know about this, it says here in the article, in addition, small gas-powered aircraft are the largest emitters of lead in the U.S. Lead was taken out of cars, right?
But it wasn't taken out of aviation fuel, was it?
Yeah, we have unleaded gasoline for cars because we have catalytic converters instead, and we got rid of lead. But I Googled it. Leaded gasoline is still allowed for aircraft, racing cars, farm equipment, and marine engines. So, I sort of thought, oh yeah, we switched to unleaded gas 40 years ago.
I was a tiny man then, tiny little boy.
Yeah. But no, all of these things. So these crop dusters that have been traditionally flying around, small aircraft, they're noisy, they're polluting, and they can apparently still use leaded gasoline. So, this is a big deal. Lead is a terrible, terrible thing to have in the environment. It's you and I have been losing IQ points over it for years.
Absolutely. And I thought, I grew up in a time when I was, sniffing gas at the gas station, getting pumped. Bad thing.
Yeah. But lead paint in houses. Everyone knows that. Like if a little baby eats a chip of lead paint in your house, that's terrible.
They would grow up to be, I don't know, something, like my neighbor.
Or a podcaster.
That's what happened to us. It's lead paint. Okay. I knew I shouldn't have chewed all that lead paint.
Yeah. But anyway, so moving on to the second story, this one is from Bloomberg, and it actually is about our province here in Saskatchewan. So James and I live in the breadbasket of Canada, the province of Saskatchewan. We are known for our wheat. We have fields and fields of wheat here, and canola and other things. This is coverage from here in Saskatchewan. The company is called Precision AI, and it's the same kind of thing. Spraying weeds in crops, but they're using cameras and they're using AI to determine what is a weed and what is not a weed, and then just specifically targeting the weed. So these are like slightly smaller drones that can fly around, find a weed with their cameras, I guess probably fly lower, spray it, and then move on to the next weed. And this one seems ideal because,
this looks like a smaller drone in the picture, that it's almost like a camera drone. No 6-foot propellers on those. Yeah,
but still like maybe 2-foot, 3-foot propellers. So yeah, it uses AI. So I think precision is probably what you ultimately want because, the fewer kind of things we have to spray on our crops, probably the better. It says that it can reduce the chemical use by up to 90%, which makes sense. Yeah. If you specifically target the weed.
I would rather them spray weed chemicals on weeds than what I'm eating, obviously.
Yes.
That would be preferable, although it's going to blow around, and, but that's pretty cool that if you are going to be killing weeds in agriculture, that would be the way to do it. I mean, my doorbell can find who in the house is, facial recognition. So why can't they identify a weed? A weed looks very different than, say, a bushel of wheat or whatever. What do you call a wheat? A chaff of wheat? A wheat plant?
A stalk?
A stalk. There you go.
We live amongst wheat, but we don't unfortunately know much about it. The other aspect of this, of course, is the cost. So they're quoting a farmer here who says that he spent nearly $1 million on herbicides in 2022 for his crop. This is protecting wheat, canola, and other pulses. And, even if we could save 50% on average, it would be a huge savings. So, $1 million for a large farm, $1 million spent on these herbicides, cut that down to 500,000, cut that down to 250. It's a great advancement.
And another thing is, these things are so automated that a farmer might, be able to just buy their own device and say, okay, geomap the area where your farm is and say, okay, go to town, and do it themselves without hiring labor to do it. And that would reduce the cost. And yeah, that sounds like the future of farming to me. Like it's the technology is really changing a lot of things. Just the micro sizing of it, the batteries, more energy density, and the precision of these, the computing power of these drones.
No, and I just caught a story the other day about, Apple on the newer iPhones has this satellite SOS service now, where if you're stuck somewhere without cell service, it can communicate with satellites. Your cell phone can get, small text messages through. And, dozens of people have already been sort of rescued by this technology. It's amazing.
All right, a little bit about sodium ion batteries, Brian, because a lot of people, including my son's professor, said, the world doesn't have enough lithium to meet decarbonization efforts. Now, a lot of other people say, no, that's wrong. But there is a battery technology that CATL developed that uses sodium ion instead of lithium ion. And sodium, of course, is salt. And they're very close, apparently. They're not that different in chemical structure. You'll find them close together on the periodic table if you were to peruse that. At least I'm told that. I can't verify that. I've been told that. And lithium is expensive because, it peaked over $80,000 per ton last year. It's down to a lot less. I think it's down to $300 for sodium compared to 80,000. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
I mean, well, it's not 800,000. It's not 80,000 anymore. But it's a lot of thousands.
Yeah.
And it's not $300. So sodium is a lot cheaper. So sodium batteries are much less affected by low temperatures, which piques my interest because we live in an extremely cold climate, not just a Canadian climate, a very Arctic part of the Canadian climate because we are on the prairies. And our EVs are affected by cold weather. Our drones are affected by cold weather. Everything's affected by cold weather.
Yeah. So the sodium batteries do better in cold weather. That's great.
Just to interject here, I'll remind you that I lost a drone over the neighboring school because we tested it out in winter and we lost radio contact with it. And I traumatized my daughter, and I've been apologizing to her ever since because it just went over the school and just went slowly down and died because it ran out of juice and because it was cold. Yeah. And it did not come home. We lost radio contact. I said, for God's sake, run as fast as you can and get radio contact before it hits the school. And we didn't make it. It was a very traumatic, and I bought a lot of drones since to make up to her. And I might buy another one. Anyway, the latest sodium batteries do not require scarce materials like cobalt or nickel, which is amazing because we don't want to use cobalt because it's not mined ethically for the most part. 90% of it is not. Nickel's hard to come by. It's expensive. They're both expensive. Lithium's expensive. So both CATL and BYD, the Chinese automaker, say that they are about to introduce EV battery packs that have a mix of lithium ion and sodium ion cells. Interesting. The lithium ion, I guess the thinking is that the sodium cells will address the low temperature performance issue, and the lithium cells will take care of the need for good performance in daily driving. So that's it's sort of a hybrid of batteries and using less cobalt, nickel, and lithium. And despite being chemically similar, sodium ion batteries today have considerably lower energy density than lithium batteries, though. So that's a problem. But they could improve, though, because LFP batteries, as I've said, have. At the Shanghai Auto Show last week, CATL said its sodium-ion batteries will be installed in the Cherry iCar due to go on sale at the end of this year. So, they'll be doing that as well as the other batteries that we talked about earlier, the high-density semi-solid-state batteries.
Yeah, well, I like that idea of maybe putting different kinds of batteries together. You put a bunch of sodium batteries in there because they're cheap and they work in cold weather. And then maybe the other half of the pack could be those super dense ones of 500 watt hours and higher cost on one side of the battery, but super low cost on the other side. And you end up with a nice mix.
Well, maybe as a cold climate person in the future, we can, the energy density will improve on the sodium batteries, and we can just specify when we're ordering, what kind of battery do you want? Well, I live in the prairies of Canada that gets down to minus 40 in the winter.
Yeah.
And maybe I want that one that has better performance than somebody who's in Arizona who wants something else. So yeah, might be worth it. Brian, it's time for, what do you think?
What do you think?
This is where I ask Brian what he thinks about things that I'm not sure about. Apple will use 100% recycled cobalt batteries by 2025. So the cobalt that they put in the batteries is not going to be unethical. It will be 100% recycled. Interesting.
Wow.
I don't know how they're sourcing all that.
That's great news. Cobalt is a problem, and the mining of cobalt is a problem, but this is being, reduced and remedied a little bit every year.
Tesla is continuing to cut its prices, especially in the United States. How far can they go, Mr. Stockton?
Yeah, well, they said on the earnings call that they're prepared to cut their profits down to zero if they have to.
Why?
Because they believe that in the future they can sell full self-driving, sell software, and still make a lot of money. But, this made Wall Street very, very nervous.
Makes me nervous for you.
But it also sort of points a map, Wall Street likes to think 1 or 2 quarters ahead. And Wall Street and, even me or a lot of people looking at Tesla, the next couple of quarters for Tesla are probably going to be pretty so-so. Their profits are probably going to come down a bit. It's a tough economic environment. They're dropping prices. They're making less on each car. So yeah, the next 6 months or so for Tesla are probably not going to be great in terms of the stock, but I think their overall strategy is sound. They're, on their way to becoming, the new Toyota. That's what they want to be. So, they're lowering prices to gain market share. They're just going to lower them so they can sell every one they make.
I think they will, because there's still long lineups for EVs, right? I mean, even the Bolt, which is getting discontinued, has a huge long lineup. I know people who are just getting theirs in Canada that have waited a year.
Yeah.
Almost a year. They're going to sell. I'm happy that they're doing that, because it's going to get more displaced gas cars off the road, right? It's going to displace gas cars. However, we're going to do our full self-driving test one of these days, and beta software, and I'm not terribly confident in what they're doing so far. And he said again that they're going to have full self-driving by the end of the year.
Yeah.
And it's not going to happen. That's not going to happen.
But, the timeline is maybe not that important. I'm still entirely optimistic, because if you want to buy an EV, you can order it online and get it quickly. And that's still just not the case with other automakers.
Tesla is given an update on battery degradation. Only 12% after 200,000 miles, or 320,000 kilometers.
Yeah.
Which is as much as anyone would own a car for, really.
Yeah. This was an update that Tesla gives pretty much every year. They have, of course, intimate data on every car that they sell, so they can track battery degradation really, really well. So yeah, 12% degradation after 200,000 miles, or 320,000 kilometers. The most I've ever owned a car, it had about 212,000 kilometers on it. So I've never come close to owning it. And I had to own that car for 15 years to get it that many miles. So this will be more of an issue for a robotaxi, or just a taxi, like something that drives a lot. But no, that's really, really good. I mean, my Tesla has about 70,000 kilometers on it, and I don't know what the battery degradation is, probably around 5%.
It's usually faster right out of the gate, right?
Right off the gate, you lose a few percent, and then it kind of stabilizes.
In the first year, it uses a lot more than it would, say, in year 5 or 6.
I don't have any complaints, but 12% degradation after 200,000 miles. That is excellent. It bodes well for the electric driving future.
It does, because robotaxis, you won't have to replace the battery very often. And if you want to use that car for, 650,000 kilometers, you put a second battery in it maybe, or something like that. Yeah. And then you get a lot of use, a lot of value out of the car. I don't know if they'll use them. I mean, rental cars don't use them for that long, but they might, they may not. I don't know. It depends on how many people vomit in them, I think.
Yeah.
The robo-taxis of the future. But that's incredible. I mean, 12%, I mean, fudge. My Leaf is probably 25% even, a lot of those Leafs Nissan Leafs were 25% after 100,000 kilometers, and this is 320,000 with 12%.
Yeah, and the Leaf famously doesn't have liquid cooling; it just has air cooling. So
Not sure that's a problem though, because I've never had a hot battery, Brian.
Yeah,
and yet, because we're in Canada and because I don't do supercharging, it doesn't even have the capability. I don't have that option.
Yeah.
It was just a city car.
The more you can regulate the temperature of the battery, keep the battery temperature good, and the less you charge to 100% down to zero, as we said before, and less fast charging. Like if you do most of your charging at home, that's better. Fast charging can be a little bit more harsh on the battery. We talked about, I think it was last week, where we kind of went through the list of cars that qualify for the Inflation Reduction Act in the U.S.
And VW wasn't on it, but now they are.
Yeah, a lot of our listeners are in the U.S. and very, very interested, I think, in what qualifies for these tax credits in the U.S. So, yeah, I just thought we should do an update because we just did that last week, and I thought that would be a pretty final list and we wouldn't have to do an update.
I was just listening to the podcast because I do. Yeah. And I said, this is not final. There's going to be a few changes. Some people are still getting their paperwork in order.
I didn't expect it to come this quickly. But in any case, the Rivian now qualifies for the full $7,500 tax credit. So really good news for Rivian or people who want to buy those. They have a truck and an SUV. And the Volkswagen ID4, the full $7,500 credit for that as well, which we mentioned last week did not qualify.
Well, that's very cool because you know what I'm thinking?
Mm-hmm.
I was reading some stuff about people saying there's going to be a lot of talk about the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, being under threat. They said, don't worry about it. The policymaker said it's all going to be just talk, that they're not going to be able to attack it. However, a change in administration and could affect the EV tax credits because that's one thing they want to get rid of.
Yeah.
Because that's a woke left thing.
Yeah.
EV taxes, EVs, clean, caring about the environment, addressing climate change, saving our children, all that. It's a woke thing.
And it is a super generous bill that is definitely like billions or trillions of dollars over a certain amount of time. So, yeah, I think you can certainly question the amount that it's going to be. Everyone's going to drive an EV eventually. So, these tax credits could go on for a very long time and amount to a very large amount. But yeah, I mean, we, talk about the Tesla price cuts. Well, now it's put them in striking distance, in some cases below the average cost of a new car in the US, gas or electric. I think that's generally good news, should lead to lots of salespeople looking at these cars for the first time. And an update on the tax credit here in Canada as well. This story came out this week. So here in Canada, we have a $5,000 federal tax, well, not a tax credit, a rebate on buying an electric car. And I got that for my Model 3 years ago. Then they ended up raising the prices, did not qualify anymore. Then the Model 3 eventually did become eligible again. And now the Model Y is eligible again in Canada. So this is kind of a big deal. You need the first trim, the lowest trim, to be under a certain price point. I think it's $60,000. But then once you do that, then the higher trim models also qualify as long as you have one model below. So the Model Y had never qualified before for the federal rebate in Canada. And now that it does, and the story from Reuters this week says that it's because the Model Y standard range that we're getting in Canada is apparently going to be coming from China.
And I predicted that on the show a long time ago. Why? Because Sandy Munro, who knows the Chinese auto industry, was determining that it would be 20% cheaper to make a Model Y in China or Model 3 than the United States.
Mm-hmm.
So why not start selling those to other parts of the world, which they do. That's China does ship to Europe, for example. But then I thought, well, maybe Canada too.
Yeah. And up till now, they haven't needed to because there's production in California. They were maybe not going to need to because there's increasing production in Texas. So they would probably rather supply from Texas. But the thing is that the Chinese-made cars will not qualify for any of these tax credits in the US that we're just talking about, but it doesn't disqualify them in Canada. So a Chinese-made Model Y still qualifies for Canada's $5,000 federal rebate. So it would appear that the standard range version, this is about a 400-kilometer Model Y, that those ones are going to be coming from China. Probably the higher trims would still be coming from California, but it makes them eligible in Canada for the rebates, and in Quebec, especially, you can get an extra tax credit, so up to $12,000 off a Model Y or a Model 3 in Quebec, in Canada, which is a big deal. And I think BC as well it has an addition to the 5,000. So, this should move a lot of cars.
I was reading about some of the United states running out of their own tax credit because they're so popular.
Yeah.
That some states are running out of their, like, you can't get them anymore because they had a max sort of set on them. We've done that federally in Canada as well, but they keep expanding it. But yeah, so it might be a good time to buy an EV if you're on the fence. Maybe put an order in for something, and just in case those tax credits do go away, or if your state incentive, you have one now that's intact, it may not be forever. It's not a guaranteed thing. Brian, it's time for the tweet of the week. This is from senior transport specialist at the World Bank, Daniel Moser. He tweeted that he was at the Shanghai Motor Show and was shocked at the dominance of EVs and their falling prices. This is what he says, the entire Chinese automotive market is being shaken up. Battery cars have reached such a low price level that they are often much more economically attractive than combustion engines here in China. Electric cars will very soon be dirt cheap, his emphasis. Globally, what does this mean, he asks. Interesting stuff that he thinks might happen. Vehicle kilometers traveled will drastically increase, if not mitigated by governments, somehow with policy, because BEV, battery electric vehicles, are much cheaper to operate than fossil cars. You and I know that.
I drive more because it's electric.
And you do. And that's what I thought. I thought of you. I thought, well, that's not right. And then I thought of you, and I thought, that is right, because you are driving more. I drive more. I drove more in the Prius because it was fuel efficient. We just did lots of exploring in it that we wouldn't have normally done. Vehicle ownership, he says, could drastically increase. So this is something that is contrary to what the trend is in the world. Vehicle ownership is going down. It was down 10% recently in the United States because people were not trading in their cars. They were using, younger people were not preferring vehicle ownership. They didn't want to drive. They just wanted to use the Ubers and public transportation. So vehicle ownership, he says, could increase because the price of the cars are so low. I mean, for $9,000 or $10,000, you can buy a fairly compelling EV in China.
Yeah.
They're small, but I mean, that's for that market, they seem to accept it, and especially in a lot of cities where there's a lot of policy that encourage it or discourage not having it. So, vehicle ownership could go up. That's interesting. Leading to sprawl, urban sprawl again, and highly cost ineffective transport systems because, less people are using the subway. So therefore the subway costs more overall per person. So that's not good. He was just so taken aback by everything that was going on, but how fast this was. He started to think of the implications. Now, I'm not convinced that just because EVs are cheap that everyone's going to want them. If people don't want a car, they don't want a car.
Yeah.
And they're going to want robotaxis. We know that robotaxis are coming, and I guarantee you that they will be preferential for most people, even me at some point.
Yeah. And it's going to depend on where you are in the world. We live in a city that is very car dependent, but I visited Beijing a few years ago, around 2016, and we rode the Beijing subway system, which was incredible. The subway there is amazing. It's like the second biggest in the world, I think. And they had only started building it like 10 or 15 years earlier.
Of course they did. They probably...
Yeah.
It would take them that long to build a half a kilometer in Toronto of subway.
Yeah. But, I do remember
But it's good not to be communist, I'll say that.
But when I did live in Toronto, one of the things that was nice about it is you have a choice. Like I did own a car when I lived in Toronto, but you had really good choices of you could bike somewhere because there's bike lanes, and you could take the subway, you could take streetcars and, taxis. It's the kind of town where you can hail a taxi down on the street. So it's nice to have choice.
I think that, if you are in a situation where you own a car and you're paying off say you buy a used car and the interest rates are high and you're paying $400 a month, $500 a month for a payment. And then you have a $3,000 repair comes to it. And then robotaxis are a thing, so you can buy a membership for $100 a month, say. And it's probably going to be cheaper than that. They think at some point, 30 years from now, it could be $20 a month. Or in some cases, free with sponsorship, like a coupon to go to A&W and buy a burger for free in our car and things like that, or the mall if they still exist. So, I don't know. We'll see. But that's interesting, and it affects my son, who wants to be a traffic engineer of some sort or a city planning person of some sort. And I'm always telling them to stay on top of things because the world is changing, and the things that you think now might be in the future may not be part of your future. So you have to be adaptable. And that is true for so many things, Brian. Time for the lightning round.
The lightning round is a fast-paced look at the latest headlines in climate, clean energy, and transportation.
From Bloomberg Green, China is losing its title as the world's most populous nation. It's ceding the top spot, of course, to India with a population of 1.4 billion. That's slightly higher than its rival, according to estimates by the UN's World Population Dashboard. The reason? India had more than twice as many babies born than China in the last year. Tone it down, India. Too many babies are not good for the planet right now. But half of India's population, Brian, is under 30. Shocking. Shocking. Chile's president said on Thursday he would nationalize the country's lithium industry. The world's second largest lithium producer, Chile is, and that's probably not good for the lithium companies in Chile because, they're having it sucked away from them, given to the government. Reuters says it poses a fresh challenge to electric vehicle manufacturers scrambling to secure battery materials as more countries look to protect their natural resources. Mexico nationalized its lithium deposits last year. Chile has the largest lithium reserves in the world. The policy would, in time, transfer control of Chile's vast lithium operations from industry giants like SQM to a separate state-owned company. I bet their stocks went down quickly. That would have been unpleasant, out of nowhere. The German government confirmed plans to no longer allow standalone fossil fuel heating systems. This is big news, Brian. To be installed from January 1st of 2024. This is your last year to install a gas furnace, Germany. It's over. Heat pumps for everyone.
Heat pumps all around.
And that's probably going to spread to other countries, too, such policy. SpaceX's Starship kicked up a dust cloud, leaving Texans with a mess. Residents of Port Isabel said that their city was covered in grime following SpaceX's recent rocket launch on Thursday. The city said there was no immediate concern for people's health. Yeah, they always say that. Brown sandy substance deposited everywhere. And it also shook the hell out of the residents, Brian, because that is a big mother rocket.
Yeah.
There's a BMF.
That was fun to watch, though.
Blew up real good. I'm surprised you didn't cover it on the show because I know how you like things blowing up. From Inside EVs and Electric, the California Energy Commission says the Golden State hit its previously designated EV sales target of 1.5 million electric vehicles 2 years ahead of its goal in 2025. And that is going to be a lot more common. Exceeding goals. China's doing it in some levels too. Former California government Jerry Brown set the 2025 EV sales target, get this, back in 2012. The only fully electric car for sale was the Nissan Leaf. And the Model S from Tesla came out later that year. So it's amazing that they even foresaw this, that set that with, you're hedging your bets there thinking that EVs are going to happen. People think they're doing that nowadays.
Close in predicting the number and when it would happen.
This week in climate law, we like to talk about climate law on the show because that's a big deal now. The Law Society has issued new climate guidance and it's momentous stuff. Law firms can refuse to act for polluters if the client's activities inhibit progress towards net zero. In other words, if you're a lawyer, a law firm, you can't say no. You can't say turn down people, but now you can on moral grounds if that company is a polluter. So Good luck, Big Oil, finding your next lawyer. A jury unanimously ruled that a new power line bringing 1,200 megawatts of hydropower from Quebec through Maine to customers in Massachusetts may proceed with construction, effectively overturning the controversial 2021 ballot referendum that rejected the project. I don't know what the big deal was. I don't think undersea cables are that bad.
Yeah. No, that clean hydropower, you'd think that they would want that in Massachusetts.
From Carbon Brief, global oil and gas producer Shell appears to concede that staying below 1.5 degrees of warming means an end to fossil fuel growth. They didn't come out and say that in English, but they did state it in their numbers that they reported. So Carbon Brief went through their numbers and basically said, yeah, they get it. They know what's going on. So this is BS. The Canadian Climate Institute says Canada has updated its estimate of the social cost of carbon emissions. This is the social cost as in real cost of money involved in a ton of carbon going into the atmosphere. They pegged the value to society in 2023 of every ton of carbon emissions by $261. It is $261 for every ton that's the cost to society. This aligns with the latest science and estimates used by the United States EPA. So, we say that there's a tax on carbon. Well, there should be, because it's costing a lot in insurance premiums and in damage and in health costs. And
it's like having a garbage dump that has no fee to dump garbage in it. You're just encouraging people to dump tons of extra garbage instead of, reusing it or finding something else to do with it.
Utah's largest electric utility has been offering heat pump rebates since 2018, but you didn't know that.
No.
When only 152 customers took advantage. Not surprising. That grew to 512 in 2020, 2,087 in 2021, and 4,229 last year. So that is starting to take off if you look at your S-chart adoption curves.
Yeah, the year of heat pumps, which were barely a thing when we started this podcast.
They really were. It's quite amazing to see. We didn't see that one coming. I didn't see that one coming. Rivian.
I think I did.
Of course, you bought one, for God's sake. At great expense. When's that coming? Still no word?
Soon. I'll update when it's ready.
Wow. Stay tuned, people. Make sure you're subscribed to the podcast to get that information. Rivian to open its EV charging network to the public, much like Tesla is doing. So they will get money then from the federal government to do their EV charging, because they have to open it to everyone.
No, and there was an announcement that Tesla is opening up their charging network in China to non-Teslas as well. So they're starting to do that rollout that they've done mostly in Europe, a little bit in the US. There is a common connector in China for charging cars. So it's an easier thing to do. Europe and China both decided to standardize on a single connector.
And finally this week, a Financial Times op-ed this week says the IEA, the International Energy Agency, will later this month publish an extrapolation that on current EV trends, 5 million barrels per day of oil demand will be displaced by 2030. That is the significant number, because once you reach that, it's a point of no return. It's just going to get worse.
Yeah.
At a very fast rate. So good luck to you, oil people. Petrol demand peaked in 2021. That is, gasoline. And all transport fuels, airplane fuel, diesel, and petrol combined, will peak in 2025. That is more than our time for this week. It was a big fat one because we have so much energy in the morning. The morning show with Brian and James. We should be shock jocks now. Take the time to contact us, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. Lots of other ways to contact us, and where we are in social media are in your show notes. Check us out on YouTube and TikTok, and the Clean Energy Store is in your show notes as well if you care to buy merch. If you're new to the show, remember to subscribe, because we're here every week, and we'll see you again next time.
We'll see you and the Morning Zoo crew next week.